The massive medical station floated silently in the darkness of space, its bright lights cutting through the void like a beacon of hope. But inside the sterile white corridors, hope was in short supply. This place had become a graveyard for children from across the galaxy, and everyone who worked there knew it. The alarm bells rang through the emergency bay as another transport ship docked. Medical staff rushed to receive the latest patients, but their faces showed no excitement, only tired resignation. They had seen this too many times before. Another outbreak, another dying child, another family's heartbreak. This time, the patient was barely 6 years old by human standards. His small body was covered in beautiful purple scales that shimmered under the medical lights, but those same scales were now dull and lifeless. The Zephyrian boy could barely breathe, his chest rising and falling in weak, irregular patterns. The neural plague that was sweeping through his home planet had already claimed thousands of children just like him. The medical team worked quickly to get him stable, but their movements were mechanical, routine. They had done this dance too many times. Connect the life support systems. Run the standard tests. Make the child comfortable. Wait for the inevitable. In the break room later that shift, the mood was darker than usual. Dr. Kelvin, a tall reptilian physician with green scales and yellow eyes, pulled out his electronic tablet and began typing. His species was known for being logical and practical, sometimes to a fault. "Anyone want in on this one?" he asked casually, his forked tongue flicking out as he spoke. "I'm thinking 3 days maximum. The kid's neural pathways are completely fried." Dr. Vorthak, a blue-skinned Altrurian with 4 arms, looked up from her meal. "That's generous. I saw his brain scans. 2 days, tops." Other doctors gathered around, some shaking their heads sadly while others pulled out their own devices to place bets. It had become a tradition on the station, though not one they were proud of. Betting on how long the terminal patients would survive was their way of dealing with the constant death and failure. It helped them feel like they had some control over the uncontrollable. "The neural plague always follows the same pattern," explained Dr. Ixon, an insect-like physician whose species had advanced medical knowledge. "The brain tissue breaks down systematically. We can slow it, but we cannot stop it. The betting pool helps us accept reality." The conversation was interrupted when someone dropped a medical tray with a loud crash. The metallic clatter echoed through the break room, making everyone turn around. Standing in the doorway was David Washington, a human nurse who had transferred to the station just 6 months earlier. David was a big man from Chicago, with kind eyes and gentle hands that had comforted thousands of sick children during his career on Earth. He had come to space hoping to help save lives across the galaxy, but what he found here was slowly breaking his heart. "Did I hear that right?" David asked, his voice trembling with barely contained anger. "You're betting on when that little boy dies?" The alien doctors looked at each other uncomfortably. They had forgotten that humans viewed death differently than most species. Where other races saw logical acceptance of inevitable outcomes, humans saw surrender. "It is not cruelty," Dr. Kelvin explained carefully. "It is how we cope with loss. This child will die, just like all the others. The plague is 100% fatal in Zephyrian younglings. We have tried everything." David walked slowly to the window that overlooked the pediatric ward. Down below, he could see the small purple form lying motionless under a tangle of medical equipment. Machines beeped steadily, tracking his vital signs, but the child looked so small and fragile against the large hospital bed. "Have you tried everything, though?" David asked quietly. "Or have you just tried everything that fits into your neat little protocols and procedures?" The silence in the room was thick and uncomfortable. The alien physicians had followed galactic medical standards precisely. They had used approved treatments, calculated dosages, and monitored progress according to established guidelines. But David was right about one thing: they had given up hope before they had even started fighting. "That little boy down there is somebody's whole world," David continued, his voice growing stronger. "Somewhere out there, parents are praying to whatever gods they believe in, hoping their child comes home. And you're sitting here betting on when he dies like it's some kind of game." Dr. Kelvin put away his tablet, suddenly feeling ashamed of the betting pool. "Human David, you do not understand. We have seen hundreds of these cases. The outcome is always the same." David turned back to face the room full of alien doctors, and his expression was fierce and determined. "Maybe that's because you've been treating the disease instead of fighting for the patient. Where I come from, we don't give up on kids. Ever." The human nurse walked toward the door, then stopped and looked back one more time. "That little boy is going to live, and I'm going to make sure of it. You can bet on that." Keisha Thompson had seen more dying children than anyone should ever have to see. 15 years working in pediatric intensive care units back on Earth had taught her that sometimes medicine wasn't enough, sometimes you needed something more. You needed heart. You needed stubbornness. You needed the absolute refusal to let death win without a real fight. When David told her about the betting pool, Keisha felt her blood boil in a way it hadn't since her early days as a young nurse in Detroit. She had left Earth specifically to help save children across the galaxy, thinking that advanced alien medicine would give them better tools to fight disease. Instead, she found doctors who gave up before they even started trying. They want to place bets on a baby dying? Keisha asked, her voice rising with each word. A baby who's still breathing, still fighting for his life, and they're already planning his funeral. David nodded grimly. He had found a kindred spirit in Keisha. Both of them came from backgrounds where giving up simply wasn't an option. Both had grown up in communities where you fought for every life, no matter how impossible the odds seemed. These alien doctors, they follow their rules and procedures like robots, Keisha continued, pacing back and forth in the small break room they had claimed as their planning space. They see the statistics and think that's the end of the story. But statistics don't account for everything. They don't account for hope. They don't account for love. And they sure don't account for what happens when humans decide they're not going to let someone die. That night, both David and Keisha stayed long past their shifts, huddled together in the medical library with stacks of digital files and research papers. The Zephyrian biology texts were written in multiple languages, some requiring translation devices to understand. The medical databases were enormous, containing thousands of years of accumulated knowledge from dozens of different species. But as they read deeper into the research, they began to see something the alien doctors had missed. The neural plague attacked Zephyrian brain tissue in a very specific pattern, yes, but it did so because their medical treatments were too predictable. The disease had evolved to overcome their standard protocols. Look at this, Keisha said, pointing to a brain scan on her tablet. The plague spreads along the same neural pathways every time because their treatments always follow the same approach. It's like the disease knows what's coming. David leaned over to look at the data. So what if we don't do what it expects? What if we try something completely different? Exactly what I was thinking. Keisha smiled for the first time in days. Back home, when we had kids with brain injuries or diseases, sometimes the strangest treatments worked. Music therapy, art therapy, even just talking to them constantly. The human brain is chaos, but it's creative chaos. Maybe that's what we need here. They worked through the night, cross-referencing human medical techniques with Zephyrian physiology. It was like solving a massive puzzle, trying to figure out how treatments that worked on human children might be adapted for an alien species. Some ideas were clearly impossible, their body chemistry was too different. But others showed promise. The next morning, Dr. Vorthak found them still working in the library, surrounded by empty coffee cups and scattered research materials. The tall blue-skinned chief medical officer looked disapproving as she approached their table. "I have heard about your plans," she said, her forearms crossed in front of her chest. "You cannot experiment on a dying child. Our medical protocols exist for good reasons. They have been tested and refined over centuries." David looked up at her, his eyes red from lack of sleep but his expression determined. "Your protocols have failed hundreds of children. How is trying something new worse than letting him die?" "Because your methods are untested," Dr. Vorthak replied firmly. "They could cause him unnecessary pain. They could make his condition worse. They could kill him faster than the disease would naturally." Keisha stood up slowly, her 15 years of experience giving weight to her words. "Doctor, with all due respect, that child is going to die anyway according to your statistics. 100% fatality rate, right? So we literally cannot make things worse. We can only try to make them better." "The Galactic Medical Board would never approve such experimental treatment," Dr. Vorthak insisted. "You could lose your licenses. You could face criminal charges. This is not worth destroying your careers." David walked over to the observation window that looked down into the pediatric ward. The small Zephyrian boy, the chart said his name was Kethai, was lying motionless under a web of monitoring equipment. His purple scales had grown even duller overnight, and the readouts showed his brain activity continuing to decline. "See that kid down there?" David said quietly. "His name is Kethai. He's 6 years old. He likes playing with small toy spaceships. We found 3 of them in his belongings. His parents sent a message yesterday asking if they could talk to him, but he's too weak to respond." Keisha joined David at the window, both of them staring down at the dying child. That boy is someone's entire world. His parents probably stayed up all night making those toy spaceships for him. They probably taught him to count by playing with them. They probably told him bedtime stories about adventures in space. Dr. Vorthak shifted uncomfortably behind them. She had children of her own back on her home planet. Your protocols might be safe, David continued, but they are not saving him. Sometimes you have to choose between following the rules and doing what's right. Keisha turned back to face the chief medical officer. We're not asking for permission anymore. We're telling you what we're going to do. We're going to try every crazy, unproven, impossible thing we can think of to save that child's life. And if the medical board shuts us down? Dr. Vorthak asked. David smiled grimly. Then they'll have to shut us down while we're actively saving a child's life. Let them explain that to the galaxy. The pharmacy on the medical station had always been a quiet place, filled with rows of carefully labeled medications from dozens of different worlds. But in the past week, it had become a laboratory of desperate hope. Terry Jones, the head pharmacist, had turned his sterile workspace into something that looked more like a mad scientist's experiment than a regulated medical facility. Terry had grown up in Atlanta, where his grandmother had taught him that sometimes the best medicine came from mixing old wisdom with new science. She had been a nurse during the early days of AIDS research, when doctors were trying anything and everything to save lives. Now, decades later and light years away from home, Terry found himself in the same position. The computer screens around him showed complex molecular diagrams and chemical formulas that would have made most people's heads spin. He was trying to do something that had never been attempted before, combining human psychiatric medications with Zephyrian neural stimulants to create a treatment that might repair damaged brain tissue. This is either brilliant or completely insane, Terry muttered to himself as he carefully measured out compounds with precision instruments. The mathematics alone were staggering. Zephyrian body chemistry was completely different from human biology, and one wrong calculation could turn medicine into poison. His hands moved steadily as he worked, but inside his chest, his heart was racing. Every measurement had to be perfect. Every combination had to be tested and retested. The life of a 6-year-old boy hung in the balance, and Terry knew that if his calculations were wrong, he might kill the child faster than the disease would. Late that evening, Terry's wife Denise called him from their apartment on Earth. She could see the exhaustion in his eyes through their video connection, but she also saw something else, the same determination that had made her fall in love with him 15 years earlier. How's it going, baby? Denise asked softly. She was a teacher back home, and she understood the weight of having a child's life in your hands. It's terrifying, Terry admitted, rubbing his tired eyes. I'm creating medications that have never existed before. If this works, we might save not just this one kid, but thousands of others across the galaxy. But if I mess up? You won't mess up, Denise said firmly. You've been preparing for this your whole career, even if you didn't know it. Remember when you helped develop that new treatment for childhood cancer? Everyone said that was impossible too. Terry smiled for the first time in days. That was different. I had a whole team of researchers and months of testing. And now you have something even better, Denise replied. You have a reason to succeed that goes beyond science. You have love. You have determination. And you have that stubborn streak that drives me crazy but also makes you the best pharmacist I know. 3 floors up in the pediatric ward, Keisha had moved a comfortable chair next to Kethai's bed and had barely left his side for 2 weeks. The alien medical staff thought she was losing her mind, but Keisha knew exactly what she was doing. Back on Earth, she had seen comatose children wake up when they heard familiar voices. She had watched brain-damaged kids improve when they were surrounded by music and stories and love. Today I'm going to tell you about a little girl named Ruby Bridges, Keisha said softly, holding the boy's small purple hand in hers. She was only 6 years old, just like you, and she had to be braver than most adults ever have to be. The monitoring equipment around Kethai's bed beeped steadily, but Keisha had learned to read the patterns. His brain activity increased slightly when she talked to him, even though he couldn't respond. Somewhere inside that damaged mind, he was listening. Ruby lived in a place where some people thought children with different colored skin shouldn't go to school together, Keisha continued. But Ruby's parents knew that was wrong, just like we know it's wrong to give up on sick children. She pulled out her phone and started playing music, old gospel songs that her grandmother had sung to her when she was scared or sick. The melodies filled the quiet hospital room, mixing with the sounds of the medical equipment to create something that was both technological and deeply human. Dr. Kelvin walked past the room and stopped to watch through the window. The reptilian physician had been one of the main organizers of the betting pool, but now he felt ashamed every time he saw the human woman's dedication. She had been there for 18 straight days, sleeping in short shifts, eating quick meals, but never abandoning her post. "How long will she keep this up?" asked Dr. Ixon, the insect-like physician who had joined him at the window. "I don't know," Dr. Kelvin replied. "Humans are different. They don't accept defeat the way we do." Inside the room, Keisha was telling Kethai about her own childhood in Detroit, about playing in the snow and eating her mother's cooking and learning to ride a bicycle. She described Earth's blue skies and white clouds, painted pictures with her words of a world the alien child had never seen but might someday visit. "The doctors here think you're going to die," she whispered, leaning closer to his ear. "But I've seen children fight impossible battles and win. I've seen kids your age show more courage than grown-ups. And I know you're fighting in there, even when you can't show us." The alien medical staff had stopped making jokes about the human team's methods. What had started as amusement had turned into nervous respect, and then into something approaching awe. David, Keisha, and Terry worked around the clock in 8-hour shifts, so someone was always with Kethai, always monitoring his progress, always pushing for improvement. On the morning of day 18, something changed. Dr. Vorthak was making her usual rounds when she heard Keisha gasp from inside Kethai's room. The chief medical officer rushed through the door, expecting to find that the child had finally succumbed to his disease. Instead, she found Keisha crying tears of joy, holding the small boy's hand as his eyes fluttered open for the first time in weeks. The purple scales on his face seemed brighter, more alive. The monitoring equipment was beeping faster, showing increased brain activity and stronger vital signs. Kethai looked around the room with confusion and fear, but when his gaze fell on Keisha's face, he seemed to relax. Somehow, even through the fog of his illness, he recognized her voice, her presence, her love. "Hello there, sweet boy," Keisha whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Welcome back." Dr. Angela Davis had arrived at the medical station just 3 weeks earlier, fresh out of her residency at one of Earth's most prestigious hospitals. She was young, brilliant, and eager to prove herself among the galaxy's best medical minds. But what she found when she got to the station was beyond anything she had learned in medical school. The case of the Zephyrian boy had become legendary throughout the facility. When Angela first heard the story, about human medical staff refusing to give up on a terminal patient, she thought it was just another example of human stubbornness. But then she saw the brain scans, and everything changed. "This shouldn't be possible," Angela whispered as she stared at the holographic display showing Kethai's neural activity. The before and after images were like looking at two completely different brains. 3 weeks ago, the scans had shown massive damage, with dead tissue throughout the neural pathways. Now, she was looking at active, healthy brain tissue that seemed to be rebuilding itself from the inside out. David stood beside her, exhausted but proud as he explained their treatment approach. "We combined Terry's experimental medication cocktail with constant cognitive stimulation. Keisha talked to him for 18 straight days, playing music, telling stories, basically forcing his brain to stay active even while he was unconscious. But neural tissue doesn't regenerate like this," Angela said, zooming in on specific areas of the brain scan. "Especially not in Zephyrian physiology. Their species has never shown this kind of recovery from neural plague damage." "That's what everyone kept telling us," David replied with a tired smile. "But we figured it was worth trying anyway. What did we have to lose?" Angela spent the next several days studying every detail of Kethai's treatment and recovery. She interviewed Terry about his medication formulations, watched hours of security footage showing Keisha's bedside vigil, and analyzed blood samples that showed the boy's remarkable progress. The more she learned, the more excited she became. "You've created something revolutionary here," she told the human team during one of their planning meetings. "This isn't just about saving one child. This treatment protocol could help thousands of patients across dozens of species. Neural degenerative diseases that we thought were incurable might actually be treatable." But their success was about to create an entirely new set of problems. Word of Kethai's recovery had somehow reached his home planet, and the Zephyrian government was not pleased. Their culture had very specific traditions about death and dying, and a child who had been declared terminal was expected to die with dignity among his own people. The delegation arrived on a sleek governmental transport ship, with official seals and legal documents demanding the immediate transfer of the patient. The lead official, a tall Zephyrian with elaborate ceremonial scales, spoke in formal, clipped tones through his translation device. "The child belongs with his family during his final moments," the official declared to the assembled medical staff. "Our traditions require that he return home to complete his spiritual journey. Your interference has already disrupted the natural order. Keisha stood up from her chair in the conference room, her face showing the strain of weeks of stress and sleepless nights. Final moments? Look at him. He's sitting up, he's talking, he's eating solid food. This child isn't dying anymore. Our medical experts disagree, the official replied coldly. The neural plague is always fatal. Any apparent improvement is temporary. The child will die, and when he does, it should be surrounded by his own people, not alien strangers. Dr. Vorthak, caught between her medical ethics and diplomatic pressure, tried to find a compromise. Perhaps we could arrange for the family to visit here, or set up a long-term care facility that honors both our medical protocols and your cultural traditions. But the Zephyrian official was unmoved. The boy leaves with us today. These are not requests, they are legal demands backed by interplanetary treaty. That's when Jerome Baker stepped into the room. The security chief was a former Marine who had served on 3 different planets before taking the job at the medical station. He was not a man who backed down from fights, especially when children were involved. Jerome was a big man with kind eyes and a voice that commanded respect. He had grown up in a tough neighborhood in Philadelphia, where protecting kids was considered the most important job any adult could have. When he looked at little Ketha, he saw every child he had ever protected during his years in uniform. I've been listening to this conversation, Jerome said quietly, and I think there's been a misunderstanding. See, this is a medical facility under human administration, operating under Earth colonial law. No patient leaves this station against medical advice, and no child leaves without proper legal guardianship verification. The Zephyrian official's scales rippled with anger. You have no authority to interfere with our governmental decisions. This child is our citizen. Jerome smiled, but there was steel in his expression. Actually, I have complete authority over security matters on this station. And right now, I'm concerned about the safety and well-being of a 6-year-old patient who's still recovering from a serious illness. The standoff that followed made headlines across the galaxy. News reporters from dozens of planets arrived to cover the story of human medical staff who had saved an alien child's life and were now refusing to let his own government take him away. The images were powerful, a small purple-scaled boy sitting in a hospital bed, surrounded by human doctors and nurses who had become his protective family. Public opinion began to shift as more details emerged. People learned about the betting pool, about the human team's refusal to give up, about 18 days and nights of constant care. They saw video messages from Ketha himself, speaking through his translation device about how much he loved his new friends and how scared he was to leave them. The Zephyrian government found itself in an impossible position. Their own people were beginning to question traditions that seemed to prioritize death over healing. Other planets were threatening diplomatic consequences if they forced a recovering child to return home to die. Meanwhile, Jerome maintained his position outside Ketha's room, making it clear that anyone who wanted to take the boy would have to go through him first. Other human staff members joined him, creating a human barrier of protection around their young patient. This isn't about politics or traditions, Jerome told the news reporters. This is about a little boy who fought for his life and won. Nobody's taking him anywhere until he's strong enough to make his own choice about where he wants to go. 6 months had passed since the standoff that made galactic headlines, and the medical station had transformed into something entirely different. What was once a place where alien doctors quietly accepted death had become a beacon of hope, where impossible recoveries happened regularly and children who should have died were instead learning to help save others. Ketha had grown several inches taller, his purple scales now brilliant and healthy, shimmering under the medical facility's lights like precious gems. But the most remarkable change wasn't physical, it was the way he carried himself. The frightened, dying child who had arrived 6 months earlier had become a confident young boy with an insatiable curiosity about medicine and healing. Every morning, he would wake up in his small room near the pediatric ward and immediately begin his unofficial rounds with the human medical team. He had appointed himself as a junior medical assistant, though no official paperwork existed for such a position. The alien administrators had learned not to question human innovations, especially when they worked. "Good morning, David," Ketha would say each day, his translation device rendering his excited chatter into perfect English. "What are we learning today?" David had become something like a father figure to the boy, teaching him everything from basic anatomy to advanced surgical techniques. It was remarkable to watch them work together, the experienced human nurse from Chicago and the young Zephyrian boy who had literally come back from the dead. In the pharmacy, Terry had set up a special workstation where Ketha could safely observe the medication preparation process. The boy was fascinated by chemistry, asking endless questions about molecular structures and drug interactions. His young mind seemed to absorb information at an incredible rate, making connections between human and alien pharmacology that even experienced doctors had missed. Why do human medications work so differently from ours? Ketha asked one afternoon, watching Terry carefully measure compounds for a new patient. Because human medicine comes from chaos, Terry explained with a smile. Your people's medicine is precise and predictable. Ours is creative and sometimes crazy. When you combine them, you get something neither species could achieve alone. But it was with Keisha that Ketha learned the most important lessons about being a healer. She taught him that medicine wasn't just about drugs and procedures, it was about compassion, about sitting with scared patients and holding their hands, about never giving up hope even when the situation seemed hopeless. See that little girl over there? Keisha would whisper as they walked through the children's ward together. She's scared because this is her first time away from her parents. What do you think we should do? Ketha would think carefully, then suggest ways to comfort the young patient. He learned to speak softly, to move slowly so he wouldn't frighten children from species he'd never encountered before, and to always listen when someone was afraid or in pain. The transformation wasn't limited to Ketha. Dr. Angela Davis had spent months documenting every aspect of their treatment protocol, turning their desperate experiment into a rigorous scientific study. Her research paper, titled Integrated Neural Rehabilitation Using Cross-Species Medical Techniques, had been published in the galaxy's most prestigious medical journal and was already saving lives across multiple worlds. Hospitals on dozens of planets were now requesting training in what had become known as the human protocol, the combination of experimental medications, constant cognitive stimulation, and emotional support that had brought Ketha back from certain death. Children with neurodegenerative diseases who would have died under traditional treatment were now recovering at unprecedented rates. Even more remarkably, the alien doctors who had once placed bets on dying children had become some of the most dedicated practitioners of the new treatment methods. Dr. Kelvin, the reptilian physician who had started the betting pool, now spent his free time learning human bedside manner techniques from Keisha. I was wrong, he admitted to David one evening as they watched Ketha help comfort a newly arrived patient. We thought accepting death was wisdom, but it was actually cowardice. You humans taught us that fighting for life, even impossible odds, is always worth it. Dr. Vorthak had established a new department at the medical station dedicated entirely to pediatric recovery programs. She recruited the best medical minds from across the galaxy, but insisted that every team include at least one human doctor or nurse. The combination of alien precision and human determination was proving to be unstoppable. The betting pool had been replaced with something entirely different, a celebration board where staff members posted updates about patient recoveries, breakthrough treatments, and successful procedures. Instead of wagering on death, they were now competing to save more lives. One quiet afternoon, as Ketha was helping Terry organize medical supplies, he asked the question that had been bothering him for months. David, he said, using his small hands to carefully sort medication vials, I've been wondering about something. Why did you fight so hard to save me? You didn't know me. You didn't owe me anything. Your own people told you it was impossible. David stopped what he was doing and looked at the boy who had become like a son to him. Across the room, Terry was teaching Ketha the proper way to handle hazardous chemicals, while Keisha was showing him how to read emotional distress in patients from different species. This child had become the center of their small human family, proof that love could transcend species and that hope could overcome any obstacle. It's simple, little man, David said, pulling up a chair so he could sit at Ketha's eye level. Back on Earth, we have a saying, it takes a village to raise a child. But humans believe something even more important than that. We believe that every child, everywhere in the galaxy, deserves someone who will fight for them when they can't fight for themselves. Ketha nodded thoughtfully, his young mind processing the profound simplicity of that statement. That's what humans do, David continued. We see a kid in trouble, and we don't ask if it's our responsibility or if it's possible to help. We just start fighting, and we don't stop fighting until that child is safe. The galaxy had indeed learned something important about human stubbornness. When they said over my dead body, they meant every single word, and that determination could literally bring the dead back to life.